Well, in the interest of our speakers' time and all, we'll go ahead and get things started. And as people join, they'll be able to get up to speed quickly, I'm sure. Welcome everyone to our monthly virtual support group meeting. And my name is Rick Ostrander. And joining me today is Scott Ryder, and we're joined by our guest speaker, Tim Meakem, who is the MD and Chief Medical Officer for the Focus Ultrasound Foundation. And before we get started with Tim, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, who's going to just give us a couple of highlights of what to expect for our next meeting. Scott.
Thanks, Rick. And thanks, Dr. Meakem, for being here. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew to jot on your calendar the same Thursday next month, the third Thursday of the month, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A real treat next month, as we'll be joined by Bill Bucklew. And if you don't know Bill's story, he's a PWP, a person with Parkinson's, who, believe it or not, walked from Tybee Island, Georgia to Imperial Beach, California, 2,694 miles in 67 days. His story is incredible, and we all will benefit from hearing Bill share some of his insights about his experience in living life with Parkinson's. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Meakem.
Well, thank you, Scott and Rick. I appreciate the invitation to be able to speak to everyone today, and welcome to everybody. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If anybody has trouble with their connection or your connection is lost, you can just re-log in using the same way you logged in the first time. And Paige Rice, who's my assistant, is put her cell phone in the chat box. If you have any trouble, you can use that to contact her. And during the talk, we're going to have everybody's contact information muted and things. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, and we'll have some time for questions at the end, and we'll try to go through as many as we can on the screen, but then we're going to save them, and if the ones we don't get to on the screen, we'll try to respond to you personally after the talk. So we'll go ahead and get started. Really, the agenda I have is I want to introduce you to focused ultrasound because focused ultrasound is not something that's terribly well known, even in the medical community. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the foundation, just so you know who's talking to you and what our perspective is. Most of the time is going to be spent on the current status for Parkinson's disease and the research status, because there's a fair amount happening. Then we'll do a brief summary, and then we'll get started. So focused ultrasound really is the most powerful sound that you'll never hear, but it's a sound that could save your life. And it's really an early stage, revolutionary, non-invasive therapeutic technology. It's an alternative or perhaps a complement to existing conventional therapy. And it has the potential, and I really want to emphasize the word potential, because some of what we're going to hear about is available now, but most of what we're going to hear about is in the future. But the potential is there to really transform treatment. So the way it's done is it's done to patients that are predominantly outpatient. There's no incisions. There's dramatically less pain. When you don't have to open the body, you don't have any of the problems that go with opening the body, like infection or hemorrhage or things like that. And also you recover more rapidly. And we equate this to MRI, because today everybody knows what MRI is, but 40 years ago, MRI was basically unknown. But in that time frame, it's really revolutionized the way people have diagnoses made. Well, focused ultrasound is similar in terms that it's pretty still unknown in a lot of areas. It's been called medicine's best kept secret, but it has the potential to really revolutionize the therapy that's given. And in a lot of ways, it corresponds with MRI because we use MRI guidance to guide it for many of the applications. So the principle really is just like sunlight in a magnifying glass. You're able to focus the energy on a remote point inside the body, and where it can have its effects. And we'll put that in a little little different way here. This is the representation of transducers that are focused on a distant spot under a table, and a patient is laying on the table, and this is simulating treating a breast cancer. And these individual beams pass through the body harmlessly. It's just like you think of neonatal ultrasound when you see babies. There's no impact as the beams go through. Only at the focal point is the impact seen. And here are some examples of focused ultrasound devices. And the one we're really going to talk about is this one right here. It's made by Insightec. And the patient would lie with their feet at this end, and their head is held in a frame that holds it right inside this modified helmet. And in this helmet, there's over 1,000 different transducers that are aimed at one spot in the center of your brain. And that's where, and they move that spot around so they can target it to where they want in the MRI, which gives the guidance there. And some of the other ones here, we have a prostate one. Here's one that's used for breast cancer and also for thyroid nodules, and a couple of body systems down below. And one of the key things about this is that the accuracy of focused ultrasound is really very defined. Here's a 1 millimeter space, and you can see over here is the treated part, kind of here's the edge, and here's the untreated part, and it's very defined. There's not much blurring and messing on one side or the other. And the same thing in the brain, treated over here, untreated, and a distinct line of where it's going. That's very important because you want to hit the part you want, and you want the other part to be left alone. This is a busy slide, but there's a lot to focused ultrasound. There's multiple biomechanisms that you can do based on how much energy you put in, how long you put it in, the frequency, etc. And so we're going to actually, understand there's a lot of this, but we're really going to limit this down to just a few that are important. Really, destruction of tissue, drug delivery, and blood-brain barrier openers are the three big ones we're going to do today. So for destruction of tissue, there's really a couple ways you can do it. The most commonly used is thermal ablation, kind of like what we showed with the magnifying glass. At the target point, all that energy hits there. It heats up that area and to a high temperature and kills tissue. But there's another way that's coming along that's not as far along developmentally, but is very exciting, and it's called histotripsy. And that's one where the energy is given for a very short period of time, but a very powerful period of time. And it basically disrupts all the cells, and you just have the components of the cells sitting right here in the middle, but there's no functioning cell life there because it's been destroyed. Here's one where we're talking about drug delivery, and you have to think about conventional chemotherapy. Most of the time in conventional chemotherapy, you give the drug in the vein, it goes through the entire body, and it has impact on the entire body, some of which is not good, but it also has impact on the site. Focal drug delivery is where you would give the drug in the vein, but it's not activated. It's only activated when ultrasound hits it. And then it would release it in the target area, but then the rest of the body is really unaffected by it. And those agents can be a wide number of things. It could be drugs, it could be genes, growth factors, stem cells, etc. And some of the delivery vehicles can be small things, up to antibodies, all the way up to microbubbles. And just to give some perspective of these are all very, very small, because if you look at, here's a microbubble, which is one of the largest ones from that last slide, it's still smaller than a red blood cell. So these are tiny items. But the idea is, the idea is that the drug will be contained inside those microbubbles, and they're given in your vein, and then you go in and have the ultrasound target it, and it impacts the target site, but the rest of these microbubbles that are not opened are just essentially peed out. So here's a representation of a tumor that's hit, release the target in the spot, and on you go. Blood-brain barrier open is also a relatively new thing, but it's very important. The idea behind the blood-brain barrier is that these vessels that run through your brain, we want certain things to get in there, like sugar. We want energy to get through, but we don't want other things to get through there. So like if you have the flu, we don't want the flu to infect your brain, right? So there's these cells that are very, very tightly bound along the vessels in your brain by design to help keep things that have an extra layer of protection for the brain. And that's good for most of life, but if you want to give drugs that have impact in the brain, then the problem is you can't get the drug to actually go through in enough quantities to show up and make a difference. So one of the ways focused ultrasound can be used, and it's a little different from the way it's used to have thermal ablation, is that you can cause the blood-brain barrier to temporarily open. And you can do that in a way that it will be open for a little bit, and then over the next day, it'll close back down automatically. And you can do it repeatedly. And so that's a way that we can use that technique to open the blood-brain barrier, then give drugs that we want to get across the brain, let them in, and then close back down. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. This is another busy slide, but as you're just looking at what is focused ultrasound potentially able to help with, this is kind of the current roadmap. And if you look at the greenish color, those are kind of the conceptual or preclinical research that's being done. And as you get into the yellows and the reds, those are the ones where it's been used on humans, and the red ones are the ones where it's approved. And so you can see that there's a few reds that are out there for musculoskeletal. There's bone metastatic lesions, osteoid osteoma is a particular lesion that happens in a lot of children, uterine fibroids, prostate cancer, and of course, essential tremor and tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease. Those are both approved by the FDA right now. Looking at another way, you can say, what's the trend like? In 2006, there were 3 items being looked at. Now we're at over 135. And bringing it a little closer to home, remember that essential tremor is the exact same treatment that we use to treat people who have tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease. It's the VIM nucleus, ventral medius nucleus in the brain, is the same target. This was approved actually before it was approved for tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease. It was approved in 2016, and you can see the slope there. Now we have already over 2,000 people treated for essential tremor, and so it's one of those areas that we expect this type of curve to continue as more things get approved. And so here's a patient with essential tremor. But remember, this is exactly the same as what you would have in a patient who has tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease. This is a left-handed architect, and he's trying to move jelly beans from one container to another, and you can see he's having trouble. Here's how he did in his linear drawing in concentric circles. Here's his brain, and I hope this transfers well. You can see the kind of the blue dot here is the location that we're going to try to treat to help him. And remember, this is going to be done with him being awake, without any anesthesia, no incisions, no burr holes, no electrodes, nothing penetrating the brain other than sound. And here is his treatment, and you can see kind of a red arrow pointing to the opacity there of where he was treated. And here's how he did afterwards. Considerable improvement in terms of his drawings. And here he is moving the jelly beans over, and a tremendous impact. And that's exactly what happens with tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease, exact same treatment. Some other examples, here's a patient with a pretty large uterine fibroid, and traditional surgery would be open surgery for that, which has a lot of healing and disability and time away from work, et cetera. Or the other option is you can lay and have, this treated with focused ultrasound, which this patient did. And there you can see the results. After about 9 months, it takes, after you treat it, the body has to resorb all that fibroid. It was all gone. And obviously a very different result for the patient. She was very happy. Here's one with pancreatic cancer. And you can kind of see this is the large growth of the tumor in the brain. And after treatment, you can see it's kind of darker where it was treated. And it's gradually resorbed over time. And here's a patient at 22 months. Desmoid tumors are also quite a challenge because they recur, and they're typically involve nerves and other things that you want to spare. But they can also be treated with focused ultrasound. And here's this patient who had a desmoid tumor repeat. This was a child, and a great result. Breast cancer is one that also can be treated. And you can see here's the lesion, and there's the lesion after it's been treated. And I will say breast cancer is not yet approved in the US. There's a couple of clinical trials that are out there for people with really advanced breast cancer, but one of the challenges, we have to work through the FDA for some of these clinical trials, and they have their own criteria about where we start, and it's typically at the very far end of things before we move forward. Here's a young patient that had a large tumor in her abdomen. And this was one that they tried to resect surgically, and they got into so much bleeding that they didn't think the patient would survive, so they bailed out and stopped. And then they said, okay, we're going to treat it with focused ultrasound. And you can see that this kind of darker area here is where they treated initially. And it took the pressure off. Her kidneys had been failing before, and it let those kidneys recover. And then they treated the rest of the tumor. And now I think this patient is 9, maybe 10. And this is going to occur probably, and it probably will need to be treated again. But she's basically had a normal life since they treated this tumor. And if it grows back, they'll probably just treat it again. Prostate cancer, you can see the enlarged prostate right here. This was treated with focused ultrasound, and it's gotten very small. And the PSA went from 6 to 1, and again, totally non-invasive treatment. So that's kind of an overview of what we can do with focused ultrasound. Let me just say a word about the FUS Foundation, and then we'll get on to the stuff with Parkinson's disease. And I get to talk about this, but really the person who gets full credit for all of this is Dr. Neil Cassell, who's my boss. And he's a neurosurgeon at UVA, and he knows the time it takes for a new device to go from an innovative device that somebody's got in their lab to something that actually is widely available that can treat patients. And he also knows that there's tremendous ability to account for people that are wanting this technology, but it's just not available when they're diseases, and so there's loss to that. So it's really the idea of, if we can save time and shorten the time where this is adopted, we're saving lives in the process. And as you may not know, there's tons of impediments to getting a new device approved in the current landscape. There's regulatory approvals, insurance challenges, turf battles among specialists. There's a lot of obstacles that you have to get across to make it successful. And when Dr. Cassell was looking at this, he said, there's no real model of how to accelerate this, to make that time frame be shorter. And so he said he's kind of obligated to invent. And that's when he started the foundation. And the foundation is really a medical research company before all else. And we do lots of research, and we're a tax-exempt organization. And the goal for us is to try to shorten the time frame from when this device is created to when it's available for people. And so it's really, accelerate the development and adoption of focused ultrasound and make it a global standard of care. And so while we do a lot of research, and that's primarily what we do, we also want it to not be the best kept secret in medicine. We want people to know about it. And so we do a lot of things. And one of the things we do, and the reason I put this slide here is for our newsletter. This newsletter is totally free. It comes out by email a couple times a month. And at the end, I'm going to put a link on there, and you all should sign up for that, because there's a lot of things that I'm going to talk about in a minute coming forward that you want to be aware of. And that's the best way to know about it. We've also had, success in getting this information in a lot of significant media placements to try to spread the word. And one of our board members is John Grisham, who is a wonderful man, and he actually wrote a book. It's a hypothetical book about what would currently happen to a patient with glioblastoma, which is a very, very bad brain tumor, and what might happen to this patient if focused ultrasound was able to help treat this patient. So it's a futuristic projection of what could happen. And if you look at our website visitors, we're going along, and here's John released this book, and it shot up. So it was a tremendous way to help get the word out, and we're very grateful to him. We also partner with significant organizations, and the one I want to bring out is the Michael J. Fox Foundation, because back in 2013, we were looking for partnering with other organizations to help fund things and going forward. And Michael J. Fox saw focused ultrasound, and they said, yeah, we want to be a part of this. And they helped put together a study we're going to talk about in a minute, but one that was really one of the basic studies that helped a lot of other things move forward, and it wouldn't have happened without their significant investment. So for us, they say, how do we do all this? It's all by donations. Everything's by donations. And our annual budget's about 13 million, and more than 60% of that is going to just funding research projects. And we're fortunate that we have significant donors, and they're committed. They've hung with it. Even during COVID, they've hung with us, which is great. And the whole goal, you can think of it as, we had all these barriers, and we just want to try to break through those barriers and get these things to the other side as quickly as we can. So now let's get on to the current status with Parkinson's disease, and we'll start with what's approved. Okay, the FDA has approved treatment for tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease, and this is a major study that was done here by Dr. Bond, and you'll see that Medicare has started to pay for this in Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And in Ohio, we'll start after the 8th of next month. I would say Kentucky, but there's no site in Kentucky. But so we're starting to get some movement for the Medicare contractors, which have to agree to cover this, to start paying for this treatment. In terms of international approvals, tremor-dominant Parkinson's disease is also approved in Europe, Asia, and South America. And dyskinesia, which is kind of involuntary motions, is approved in Europe and Asia. Let me just do a brief discussion of anatomy, because it's going to be important for what we're going to talk about in a minute. Up here in the far left is the putamen, and that is where dopamine production is diminished, and it goes through these nerves that come down through the globus pallidus. And this is the internal part of the globus pallidus, and that's one of the targets where the red dot is for treatment for Parkinson's disease dyskinesia. And then it can pass over the fasciculus lenticularis over towards the STN, which is a subthalamic nucleus, which is another location for treatment. It can also pass down over the ansa lenticularis around the fields of Ferrel and come up this other side. And in this region is a third location for treating dyskinesia. So we're going to talk about each of these three locations, but it's helpful if you kind of view how they fit in the anatomy of what we're trying to do. And my gratitude to Dr. Howard Eisenberg at University of Maryland, who shared this slide with me. So in clinical trials for dyskinesia, and I say dyskinesia with a plus, because dyskinesia is kind of a lump of a lot of things that could also be involved there, including bradykinesia and other things. So it's kind of a sandwich of a bunch of challenges. This target is for the globus pallidus, the internal part of the globus pallidus, which is what we just looked at, and it's a pilot study that was done a couple of years back, and this is the one that the Michael J. Fox Foundation really stepped up and helped with, and it's just published in this location, and the results are that the UPDRS-3, which is kind of the motor portion of the assessment of how people have trouble with movement disorders, it improved 45% from baseline, and that was persisted at 12 months. And we talk about p-values there because p less than 0.05 is deemed statistically significant, and this one's p less than 0.001, so it's obviously very significant. And it's helpful for me to actually look at the visual representations of how things have been done. And the key one is right here in part C, because it's the treated side only. How did it do at the baseline? How did it do at 1 month? And did it persist over time? And you can see it really did that well. And that trend is there in most of them, but that is the most specific one. Now, side effects, whenever you treat anything in the brain, there's always some side effects, and we have to look closely at those, especially as part of a clinical trial. Now, there are no serious adverse side effects by FDA criteria. And then there were 3 patients that reported some adverse events that they rated as severe. A couple had sonication pain, and 1 patient had nausea and vomiting. Now, most were mild and transient, but there were some, as you can see. You say, okay, what lasted at 12 months? There were still some. A patient had motor difficulty, a patient had balance difficulty, and 3 patients had dysarthria or trouble speaking. So good results, but there were some side effects. And the result of that one was that even before this got published, the results were so positive that there was an international pivotal study that was begun. And pivotal study means that this is a study designed to go to the FDA and get approval when we're done. This NCT number is how you can refer to these studies on a website called clinicaltrials.gov, and there's the number for this study. And this study has actually already completed its enrollment, and they have a follow-up period for those patients, and we expect to get results at the end of this year. There's another study going at the subthalamic nucleus, and this was done in Spain. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, a very high profile journal. And they treated 40 patients, and again, their results were 52% discount or improvement of the treatment, and it persisted at 12 months. So here's how you can see the representation of this. Now, this study was a randomized study where a certain number of patients had a sham procedure, and a sham procedure is where they do everything like they did for the real treatment, except for they don't sonicate the brain. And they do that to try to ensure that they're not having what's called the placebo effect, of where people think they're being treated and they think they're better when they're not. So nobody's aware and evaluating the patient whether they had the real thing or the sham in terms of the evaluation portion of this, until they got to month 4, and then the people who had the sham were then given the option to go ahead and have the rest of the treatment. But the bottom line is, you can see the blue line went way down low, and it persisted at 12 months. Now, this was a trial, again, of 40 patients, so there were more patients, but they had some side effects and some significant numbers. You know, speech disturbance in 15 patients, gait in 13. So again, there were double the number of patients before, but they had some significant side effects, and some of those persisted. And so it's one of those things where we're always looking at, we want the positive effect, but we don't want the negative effects, and how can we get the best possible outcome of those. And the third location is the pallidothalamic tractotomy, which Nobody says, everybody says PTT because it's just easier. And this is that one where you come around the third spot we showed on the diagram. And this study was interesting because it really was just their consecutive patient treatments. And this is done over in Switzerland where it's approved. The other thing that's important to remember is that this group had tremor dominant Parkinson's disease, and they also had mixed, and a lot of those were dyskinesia. So it's kind of a mix of patients, not just the other ones were mostly patients with dyskinesia and specifically asymmetric dyskinesia on one side that was problematic, the other side was not. But in looking at this group, they also had 54% improvement from baseline that was preserved at 12 months. Very similar numbers to what we've seen before. Here's their representation of that, and you can see it was a good impression. But one thing I'll note is it's not like we took it to zero, right? We got an improvement, but it's not like we went to nothing. And just keep that in mind as we're going to talk about that in a minute. And on the PTT, they did also have some side effects. Not terribly many for 50 patients, but and they had some that happened initially, and speech difficulties and hypophonia, lasted at 12 months. So there were still some side effects with their treatment too. So a couple things to note is that one is that the symptoms did not completely resolve, and that's just something to be aware of. So whenever I talk to patients to give kind of background information about this, I always say that my job is to connect you with the people that can actually do the treatment and let them give you the risks, benefits, and alternatives to this. And I don't do that because, one, we're not really allowed to do that in our organization. And you want to get the best result, the best opinion you can. And that's from the people that are actually doing the treatments, seeing the patients in follow-up, and know the best information. So it's always important to recognize that this is a great treatment. A lot of patients are very happy because the remaining tremor items or dyskinesia items they have are often very manageable for these patients. But it's not like we can say it wipes it out completely. The other thing to think about is, and this is important with Parkinson's disease and maybe less so with essential tremor, is that Parkinson's disease is a progressive disease. It's going to get worse over time for the vast majority of patients. And so people say, well, if we treat my tremor dominant Parkinson's disease now and it goes away and I'm good, what's going to happen if my disease gets worse? And in 10 years from now, is it going to come back? Am I going to have to be treated again? What's up? And the answer is we really don't know. It just has been going on that long. I mean, remember, this treatment is thermal burning of tissue that's hyperactive. So we think that part is meant to be permanent, but we just don't have the actual data to say what will happen. One good thing about focused ultrasound is it's not like radiation, where when you have radiation, you get to a certain max and you can't have any more. You can go back and retreat with focused ultrasound if you need to. So that's one of those things that time will tell on that one. A couple other things in terms of patient needs. A lot of patients have bilateral disease and they want bilateral treatment. And so there's a couple of studies in place now for essential tremor. And again, that's the same as for tremor dominant Parkinson's disease. One in the UK and Spain and some in the US. And these are staged treatments, meaning that we want to wait 9 months before we treat one side and then go to treat the other side. And the reason why they're doing that is really just due to an abundance of caution, because when this was done with open surgical treatments, they obviously didn't want to open your brain twice. And then when they treated both sides in surgery, they had a lot of complications. And so we're saying, look, we know there's some swelling and things that happen with this treatment. We want to separate the treatments just to make sure we don't have problems. There is one place in Spain where they're treating Parkinson's disease patients bilaterally, and they're separated by 6 months. All of these are still in progress, so no results, no discussion of side effects or anything yet, but these are things to watch out for. And when these results come out, we will put this in our newsletter, which is part of the reason why I suggest that you sign up for that. So the next step for movement disorders really is, what is the best way for bilateral treatment? And what if we, should we use the same technique for both sides? Or what if we did one technique with the PTT and the other technique we did with the GPI? What staging is needed, if at all? Can we get that shorter, or is it even needed? All those things are questions that still need to be answered. Another question is, what size of the lesion is optimal? Remember when I talked about it doesn't wipe it out completely? Well, if we make a larger lesion, we have more efficacy of what we want to get accomplished. But the problem is, then we also have more side effects. And so determining what's the optimal location is an optimal size is really important. The other one is, what's the best way to target it? There's kind of traditional way that neurosurgeons use with coordinates for landmarks in the brain, but then there's a lot of new stuff coming out with MRI tractography, where you can actually see brain passages and allocate where things are moving and use those as reference points. And so I think that a combination of those is probably going to be where we're going to end up, but all these things are still in progress. So now we're taking a step even further out in the future to say, everything before this point has been using focused ultrasound to try to treat the movement disorders that can either come from Parkinson's disease or come from the medicines you take for Parkinson's disease. But those are really just symptomatic treatments. And I think what people really want to do is say, can we use focused ultrasound to treat the underlying cause of Parkinson's disease? And it's an exciting time, because some of the stuff I'm talking about just happened this fall. But the idea is we can use focused ultrasound to temporarily open the blood-brain barrier to allow therapeutic agents to penetrate and have their effect. That might be a way we get at the real source of the problem. And we had a major article here that you can get to via this link that talked about this, when a couple of studies that happened in October, and I think we talked about it right then or right after, it might have been in November, to discuss what was done and what this might mean. But there's two studies. One was done in Spain, the same group that we were talking about before, and they opened the blood-brain barrier in the putamen. And the putamen, remember, that's where the initial understanding is that dopamine is not being produced in adequate quantity. They didn't have a national clinical trial number for this one, so there's no link to that. And their publication is pending. So again, that will also come out in our newsletter when I talk about that. And then there's another study listed below that was done in Canada. And these were in patients who had Parkinson's disease, but also had a reduced production of glucose cerebrosidase, which is a metabolic enzyme. And so what they did is they opened in one side of the brain, they opened the putamen, and then they were given an IV Cerezyme, which is a mechanically produced substitute for glucose cerebrosidase, to see if that would penetrate and have impact in the brain. So both of these things we'll expect publications about them and learn more about that. But that is the ultimate goal. People think is we can open the appropriate spot, and we think it may be the putamen, and put in the correct therapeutic agent, we may be able to stop Parkinson's disease right from the beginning, which would be amazing. Now, in terms of the next steps for the underlying cause, there are quite a few, and here are just some. So I don't want anyone to go away and think, hey, this can be solved this year or even next year. But these are the things that we have to get answers to go forward. But we're on it, and we've made a lot of progress in a relatively short period of time. The question is, what agent or agents? There may be some or more, and what dose and how long will it last? And what if we use combination of agents? And then what location? Even in the putamen, it's a big enough area. Are there different parts where it's better? And do you do a single injection? Do you multiple? What is the best location for it? And the timing is also important because people don't want to go in and have focused ultrasound done every day or every week. But what mechanisms are there for us to potentially do repeated treatments that would generate a sustained result? We don't know the answers to any of those yet. So that's kind of the summary of where we're at. And let me just give you a couple of things in closing. One is, this is kind of the hallmark for everybody that works there. We look at this slide, and this is kind of the gray. It's kind of the normal path of when things would be adopted and go forward. And this lists at 35 years, but it could be even longer. And what we're trying to do is just move. The upper level is when you say, okay, it's standard of care here, and here's where it's very beginning, this is time frame. If we can move this to the left and make this curve appear over to the left, every one of these patients treated in here is someone that we have helped. And that is our mantra. That's the thing we think about when we're saying, okay, what is the best thing to do? Because if we can move it to the left, a lot of patients will be helped. Because really, for us, it's truly all about the patients. And I have one little video here that I hope will transmit well, that I want to just show you about a patient that we treated a while ago that is still moving to me, even though I've seen it tons of times.
That's dyskinesia.
I can't hear a thing.
Tim, I believe you need to share your sound. It's not transmitting over.
Oh no. How do I do that?
And the caret next to the share screen.
The best way to do it is to stop sharing right now. Stop sharing. And then when you click share, at the very bottom is a little checkbox that says share computer sound. So then you click that before you say share again, and then it will share it.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Kim.
You're
All right, so
Kim for the win.
So I click on share screen now.
Yep. Click on share screen.
Yes.
And you'll see a question as to whether or not you want to share your sound. And you'll click on the box that says share computer sound.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Let me see if there's a way I can go back to the beginning.
Tim, just go back one slide. You can go back one slide and then see if you can push play again.
When I first heard I had Parkinson's, I was
How's
very
that?
surprised.
Great.
I thought of it being an older person's illness, and I've always seen people in wheelchairs, so I thought I was going to lose all my mobility. Basically anything that required movement, I couldn't do it. My leg would bounce uncontrollably. It would hyperextend and actually lock backwards. It was very, very painful. I couldn't walk, so I had to be taken in a wheelchair to the hospital. With each treatment, I could feel myself getting stronger and stronger. My symptoms were getting less and less, and my pain was getting less. Then the clinical trial director, she looked at me and she says, "Get up, you can walk." And I thought, I can walk. It was amazing. I got there in the wheelchair, unable to walk, and immediately following it, I walked to the room. It was a miracle. The focused ultrasound treatment has given me back my life. I've been able to go on walks. I've been able to run, being able to ride my bike again. It's a miracle.
All right, and that's it. And that patient, that treatment's been over 4 years now, and her results have still persisted, and she's doing wonderfully. So with that, I think we'll stop and we'll answer some questions. I would point out that the newsletter information is here on the screen, and you can sign up totally free to get newsletters from us by email. And also, if you're looking for treatment site locations, I get a lot of patients that reach out to me and say, hey, where can I get treated in South Carolina? And unfortunately, in South Carolina, there's not any place that can treat you in South Carolina. You have to go to North Carolina, and it's in the western edge of North Carolina, or maybe Virginia would be closer for you. But we have all the treatment sites that are available listed on this website, and they get updated as new ones get added. So that's a good one to write down. And obviously, if anybody wants to email me with questions, if we don't get to them today, here's my email address, and I'm happy to respond and help out. So with that, we'll look for questions on chat. Now I'm going to look and see how I can get to that on my end.
Tim, if you just click on the chat box at the bottom of your screen, you'll see I've shared a question with you in your chat.
Yeah, I don't have chat on the bottom. Let me escape and get out of this to see if I can see it. Yeah, I have my controls at the top, but I don't see chat is not on mine because.
You want to stop sharing your screen, Tim?
Sure. Voila. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to go to the top end here, which is. Okay. Are we directly attacking the tumor or simply activating digested medications? In terms of the treatment for tremor dominant Parkinson's disease, we're attacking the portion of the brain which is hyperactive. And so the idea is we have too much of the brain that's sending out signals that's making your predominantly your hand motions be hyperactive, and we're trying to kill a portion of that so it goes back to normal. I mean, for the other things that we were talking about there when I was showing the tumor that resolved and stuff like that, then we're using focused ultrasound to release the microbubbles and let those components act locally to kill the tumor. Let me go down to the next one here. I have a hydrocephalus shunt. Would this treatment adversely affect that? That's one of those that they're going to have to look at the location of the shunt and make a decision on by the physician. So I really can't give you a good answer for that. It's probably one that they'll want to see some images as to where it is, and some people have shunts that are no longer functional and they're doing okay without it, and others are still using them. So there may be some questions about that, but that would be a neurosurgeon question. Sorry, I can't answer that one. Do you see opening the BBB for agent application to be the most likely future versus burning of the cells? That's a good question, and it kind of depends. If you're, I think for diseases like movement disorders, like essential tremor and tremor dominant Parkinson's disease and dyskinesia, I think the burning of the cells is the way that they're probably going to continue to approach that. In terms of brain tumors, and I think some of these same things apply to tumors in the body as well. The opening of the BBB and in the body, sometimes there's kind of fibrous tissue that kind of surrounds an area. It's very tough for the medicine. Again, that same type of technique would be used there. It seems like that has taken a little bit more of a lead in a lot of the studies that are going on right now. But I think it's just too soon to say going forward. Okay. What about someone in the late stages of Parkinson's disease with Lewy body dementia? That's one that I didn't actually speak about because there's not great bit of information. But one of the ways that focused ultrasound is being used right now is for people with Alzheimer's disease. Okay, different disease, but the concept may be similar. Is that if you can open the blood-brain barrier, some of the things that are in the brain that you want to actually get out, like the amyloid plaques, are actually diminished if you open the blood-brain barrier. And in animal models, they did leave, and the animals did better on their Alzheimer's equivalent testing. And so that's transferred to stuff that's being done now in clinical trials in the US for Alzheimer's disease. There was a place over in Spain that was treating patients by opening a portion of their brain when they had Parkinson's disease dementia. It's only a small study, hasn't been published yet. And so I really don't know what the results might be. But I think the answer on that one is it's out there and it's being looked at, but we just don't know if it's going to do anything. So again, another reason to sign into the newsletter, because when this comes out, we'll talk about it. But I just don't know the answer on that right now. But it is something that's being looked at, which is a positive. Okay, we had someone say they're getting a machine at UT Southwestern. I have heard that, and that's great, because right now, if you look at the big summary of treatment site, there's this big circle in the south central part of the U.S. where there's not anything there, and so that would be very, very helpful. Let's see. All right, it looks like I think I've gotten through the chat questions we have. And so at this part, I think we can probably just let everybody go. If you have questions for me, feel free to reach out. Oh, I see one more that's on here. Is the speech difficulty because of the location of the Broca? You know, it's a question of, are we getting too large an area for the patients that had trouble with speaking afterwards? Is it too large an area of our treatment site, and so there's some damage being done there, thermal heating that hurts them there, and if we move that a little further away or made it smaller, would that go away? But the challenge is, if you make it too small, then you may not get the effect you want, and it may not last. So that really speaks to the question we had about what is the optimal treatment size and what is the optimal location. And some of that relates to, if you're treating by conventional methods, which is, there's some landmarks in the brain that tell you this spot and this spot, you go so many millimeters over and so many up to treat. That's kind of based on an atlas for everybody. But if you use the kind of the high-end MRI guidance, coupled with that high-end MRI guidance is coupled to my brain, and it's where the things are in me personally, and maybe that will help us be more accurate and get to an area where we can treat a smaller size precisely where we want, and the side effects will drop down. That's the hope, and that's a lot of effort is going into that right now. Okay, well, at this point, we've I think we've answered all the questions. If I missed any, feel free to send me an email, and Scott's got my contact information or anything if anybody needs it afterwards. And we're going to try to place this online for people to watch. If any of your friends or colleagues did not get to see it and want to watch this, you can access it by that way. So Scott and Rick, thanks for inviting me. I hope this was helpful to you, and best of luck to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
All right, so
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So long. See you next month.
Take care. Thank you.